SLT Mobitel Home Broadband සමගින් non-stop ගමනකට data බෝවන්. SLT Mobitel Home Broadband සමගින් non-stop ගමනකට data බෝවන්.
Marmite අලුත් සිස්ටම් එකට breakfast පාත් Marmite.
Tonight, hopeful. President Ranil Wickremesinghe says Japan has come forward to help Sri Lanka negotiate debt. Expects country to be stabilized by next year with reserves expected to rise after restructuring state-owned enterprises. Resolution adopted. UNHRC adopts resolution against Sri Lanka with 20 countries voting for it. 7 nations including China and Pakistan stand by Sri Lanka, while India and Japan abstain from voting.
Sri Lanka categorically rejects the draft resolution it presented without our consent despite our effort to engage with the main sponsors.
No change. Central Bank Governor Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe says inflation will slow down in next month. All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9, this Thursday the 6th of October 2022.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and a very warm welcome. You're joining AdaDerana 24's English Primetime News, and I'm Andrew Bernard. Now, President Ranil Wickremesinghe says Japan has stepped up in a big way to be part of Sri Lanka's debt restructuring process, expressing their willingness to co-chair Sri Lanka's creditor conference and even act as a negotiator during discussions with China. Delivering a special statement in Parliament today, the head of state said that while they expect Sri Lanka's foreign reserves to rise by 2 to 3 billion US dollars by reducing the debt burden of state-owned enterprises, he will also travel to Delhi to hold discussions with Indian Premier on the country's current situation. With these two plans in mind, President Wickremesinghe called on all political parties to band together and help the government proceed with these plans to achieve a certain level of stability and strengthen the rupee by next year.
අද අපේ රටේ ආර්ථිකය හා මූල්‍ය තත්ත්වය පවතින්නේ සාමාන්‍ය මට්ටමකින් නෙවෙයි.
Our country's economic and financial situation isn't normal at the moment. I was able to carry out discussions with the Prime Minister of Singapore, Lee Hsien Loong. Our trade agreement with Singapore was not affected. The country will benefit enormously if we are able to revive the agreement with Singapore. Japan has also given us the green light on their willingness to act as the co-chairman of the conference that will be held with Sri Lanka's creditors. We have already begun preliminary discussions with China. We expect to resume discussions with China after the National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party concludes. Another positive sign for the country is Japan's willingness to act as an intermediary during the discussions with China. During my short interaction with Indian Prime Minister Modi in Japan, I informed him that I will visit Delhi to discuss the current situation of Sri Lanka. We will be able to get IMF approval after we come to an agreement with the creditor nations and private lenders. The ADB has expressed their willingness to provide Sri Lanka with a loan of 500 million US dollars. We will be able to get bridging finance from the World Bank, ADB and other financial institutions after we get the approval from the IMF. We hope to get $1 to $2 billion as bridging financing. Through these plans, we are able to restore stability and strengthen the rupee by the end of next year. I think we will be able to show the results of our plans by mid-next year. We have begun restructuring the debt of the state-owned enterprises, which remains a burden to the economy. Due to the quick measures we took earlier this year, the Yalla season has produced a yield exceeding our expectations. All measures have been taken to provide fertilizer and seeds required for the next harvest season. We expect to strengthen the country's foreign reserves after getting funds from the ADB. We expect to increase the country's reserves by 2 to 3 billion rupees by reducing the state-owned enterprise debt burden. We have also decided to allocate the compensation received for the Express Pearl vessel to the central bank's reserves. In order to maintain free education and free health service at a good level, the government's tax income needs to be at least 18% of the country's GDP. We are taking these measures so that we can restructure our debt, get IMF approval, get funds from the World Bank, the ADB, bridging finance and funds from other nations in the next few months. I took this path knowing the risks, especially at a time when the opposition, other parties and no other leader stepped in to take up the task. I know that a majority of people in the country support the measures that we have taken. Those days, certain political parties used to say that a man who is in his final hours should not be given water to save the life. Instead, they preach to carry the dead body around the country. Some groups are trying to adopt that policy in today's context. They are waiting until the economy takes its final hit instead of saving it. They think that if the economy crashes and people die in hunger, they will be able to secure power over those dead bodies. I would like to point out that such attempts have never succeeded in the history of the world. Even if anyone does manage to secure such power, that will end in a more tragic manner. People don't need to wait for days in fuel or gas queues. There are power cuts of up to 10 to 12 hours. Schools and universities have resumed. People engaged in every sector of the economy feel that the country is returning to normalcy. Therefore, I ask all of you to forget past rivalries and to join us on this path.
ඒ නිසා මම නැවතත් ඔබේ නිල්ලා සිටින්නේ පැරණි කෝන්තර අමතක කර මේ ගමනට එක්වෙන ලෙසයි.
Now, the UN Human Rights Council Resolution HRC/51/L1 titled Promoting Reconciliation, Accountability and Human Rights in Sri Lanka was passed with a majority vote at the UNHRC in Geneva. During the vote, 7 countries including China and Pakistan opposed the resolution against Sri Lanka, while 20 nations including Japan and India abstained from casting their vote. Foreign Minister Ali Sabri called on countries, however, to reject the resolution, saying that it had been brought against the consent of the country and stated that it fails to acknowledge the progress the country is making in terms of economic recovery and human rights advancements. The final draft of the latest resolution brought against Sri Lanka by the core group at the UN Human Rights Council, which was presented yesterday at the Council, was adopted today with a majority of votes. The resolution titled Promoting Reconciliation, Accountability and Human Rights in Sri Lanka, which was sponsored by the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Germany, Malawi, Montenegro, and North Macedonia, was co-sponsored by 30 more countries by yesterday. The draft requests the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to enhance its monitoring and reporting on the situation of human rights in Sri Lanka, including on progress in reconciliation and accountability and on the human rights impact of the economic crisis and corruption. The new resolution also expresses concern over the human rights developments since April 2022, including violence against and arrests of peaceful protesters, as well as violence against government supporters, resulting in deaths, injuries, destruction and damages to houses of MPs. Speaking to the UN Human Rights Council before the vote was called, Sri Lankan Minister of Foreign Affairs Ali Sabri categorically rejected the resolution brought against the country without its consent.
Sri Lanka categorically reject the draft resolution HRC/51/L1 presented without our consent despite our effort to engage with the main sponsors. While this resolution may meet the objective of advancing the domestic political consideration of the sponsors, it manifestly unhelpful to Sri Lanka. We call on the members of this council to reject it by a vote. We strongly object to the draft resolution pronouncing on domestic economic and financial policy matters which are outside the framework of this forum. Solution to economic and financial crisis faced today by many countries will not be found in the mandate, instrument or expertise of this council. Further, it is deeply regrettable that this rambling resolution running into several pages ignores the institutional and political stability restored in Sri Lanka, despite the significant political and social challenges. Mr. President, as I outlined in my previous intervention, for all the above reasons, Sri Lanka rejects this draft resolution and request the members of this council to reject this resolution by a vote.
Mr. President, the UK is a close partner to and a long-standing friend of Sri Lanka. Our ties run deep. We bring this resolution in order to help Sri Lanka address ongoing challenges and in order to encourage progress on reconciliation, justice and human rights. I commend this draft resolution to my fellow members of this Council.
Japan strongly believes that the government's own initiative, efforts and commitments are indispensable to achieve real change on the ground. Japan considers it preferable for the international society to foster Sri Lanka's own efforts to improve the human rights situation in the country. For these reasons, Japan will abstain from voting on this draft resolution.
As a long-time friendly neighbor of Sri Lanka, China firmly supported in safeguarding national sovereignty and independence, maintaining social stability and achieving economic recovery. We believe that the Sri Lankan government is able to lead the people to overcome the difficulties. In view of the above, China will vote against draft resolution L1 Rev 1 and calls on other members.
While we have taken note of the commitments by the government of Sri Lanka on issues of implementation of the commitments in the spirit of the 13th constitutional amendment, meaningful devolution, and the early conduct of provincial elections, we believe that the progress towards the same remains inadequate. Accordingly, we urge the government of Sri Lanka to work meaningfully towards early implementation of these commitments. Achieving prosperity for all Sri Lankans and realizing the legitimate aspirations of Tamils of Sri Lanka for prosperity, dignity and peace are the two sides of the same coin. Mr. President, India will continue to work with Sri Lanka and the international community to attain the related objectives of legitimate aspirations of Tamils of Sri Lanka and prosperity for all Sri Lankans.
During the vote at the UNHRC session, 20 countries including the United Kingdom, the United States, France and Germany voted in favour of the resolution, while 20 nations including Nepal, UAE and notably India and Japan abstained from voting. China, Pakistan, Cuba, Bolivia, Eritrea, Uzbekistan and Venezuela are the 7 countries that stood on Sri Lanka's side to vote against the resolution. Now, the Paris Club creditors have reached out to China and India to coordinate Sri Lanka's debt restructuring talks in an attempt to bring major global creditors together to rework the obligations of emerging economies. An official who declined to be identified because talks are continuing has told Bloomberg that the club is awaiting a response from both countries after it sent an official request in late August to work together. An Asian diplomat in Colombo has confirmed that the Paris Club had been in contact with the country's non-Paris Club creditors. The official also told Bloomberg that coordinating on Sri Lanka may result in the formation of an official creditors committee or simply holding regular meetings to share information on debt treatment. The formation of an official creditors committee in which China and India agreed to work together with the Paris Club would help Sri Lanka secure the $2.9 billion bailout package from the IMF. Now, the 22nd Amendment Bill to the Constitution was not taken up for debate in Parliament today. According to the Speaker of Parliament, Mahinda Yapa Abewardena, the amendment bill is expected to be debated at the next parliamentary session. This decision was reached at the meeting of the political party leaders held today. This 22nd Amendment Bill to the Constitution was approved for its second reading at the Ministerial Consultative Committee on Justice, Prison Affairs and Constitutional Reforms held on the 4th of October, and a 2-day debate was scheduled for the amendment bill today and tomorrow. Stay with us for more news after this short break.
අයිනෝ පුතා හැබැයි යා ගෙදර නිදියන්නෙම අමෝතු තැනක.
කාලගුණය කොහොමුණත් රයිනෝ නං වහලට සේෆ් තමයි මුළු ගෙදරම. Rhino Cement Roofing Sheets. Then you know Rhino. I know.
Big 3.
Uber Eats මගින් ඉදිරිපත් කරන ආදරයෙන් අවශ්‍යතා ඇතියට අත්‍යවශ්‍ය භාණ්ඩ පරිත්‍යාග කිරීමට වේදිකාවක්.
Welcome back. Now, Sri Lanka Pulajana Peramuna parliamentarian Professor Ranjit Bandara was elected the new chairman of Committee on Public Enterprises. During the election today, Professor Bandara, who was nominated by the SLPP group, received 15 votes, while candidates of the Samagi Janabalawege Eran Vikramaratne received 7 votes. Following the election, the new COPE chairman said that one of the primary tasks of the committee is to consider how to upgrade the public enterprises. Professor Ranjit Bandara added that the controversial coal tender, which has been considered by the Committee of Public Enterprises, Finance rather so far, is expected to be discussed in the COPE. He also said he intends to call officials of the Public Enterprises Department and inquire into the steps taken so far on the management of public enterprises. Now, 3 state institutions have been brought under the purview of the Ministry of Public Security by President Ranil Wickremesinghe. As per the order issued via an extraordinary gazette notification, the Department for Registration of Persons, the Department of Immigration and National Dangerous Drugs Control Board will now come under the purview of the Ministry of Public Security. The National Dangerous Drugs Control Board was previously under the Ministry of Defence. Immigration Department was under the Ministry of Investment Promotion, while the Department of Registration of Persons was under the purview of the Ministry of Technology. Welcome back. Now, the Monetary Board of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka decided to maintain key policy rates of the standing deposit facility rate and the standing lending facility rate at the current rates of 14.50% and 15.50% respectively. Addressing media on the monetary policy announcement today, Central Bank Governor Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe said that they expect inflation as measured by the Colombo Consumer Price Index to reduce. While briefing the media on Sri Lanka's negotiations with the International Monetary Fund and creditors, he said the talks will continue further and expect to obtain financial assurances within the month of November in a bid to obtain IMF funds during December.
We reached the staff level agreement 1st of September, and since then we had several steps. That's where we started the debt restructuring process and approaching and discussing with the creditors, external creditors. One major event was that we made a presentation to all the creditors, giving the information that we can share at that point. And that was starting point, and in between we had several bilateral and consultation with financial advisors and also technical meetings with the bilateral partners and as well as representatives of the commercial creditors. We are in the process of having these discussions going forward. In between, there have been meetings with Minister of Finance, the authority to negotiate with relevant bilateral creditors and their representatives. And we will continue that discussion going forward. When you go to the IMF annual meetings on the sidelines, we would expect to continue that process with the relevant parties going forward.
Analysts are forecasting towards a pivot in monetary easing in the first quarter of next year. You said, the gentleman said, inflation will significantly reduce in the early 2023. Are you expecting lower inflation more than 30%?
Inflation prediction we had in the last cycle was that inflation would be still increasing this month, and then it will be turning around from this month onwards. The actual outcome also in that direction, but a little higher than our forecast point for September. As far as I can remember, our forecast for September was 67.8 something, and it ended up 69.8, 2 percentage points more than what we expected. Actual outcome going forward in our predictions, we expect inflation to at least turning around. I have to make it clear, Colombo Consumer Price Index at the end of the month expect would be lower than what we saw the last month. But obviously NCP, National Consumer Price Index, is reflecting the lagged inflation. It is not necessarily reflecting that level. Current inflation, there are some 2-3 weeks lag. That would still be rising this month, but CCPI we would expect as a much more updated price information will be coming down, and that trend we expect that to continue towards December and also January onwards. That turning around because we maintain these tight monetary conditions.
Prime Minister recently mentioned in Parliament that this SLA was a draft agreement. That's one question, and then also there is this question about why is not made it public, because you promised when you assumed office on transparency. What's the real issue? Why are you holding it back?
Obviously, start level agreement reached means there's understanding between the IMF and the authorities about the policy package. It will become an agreement before it goes to the board. The minister and the governor on behalf of the authority usually sign this, then it becomes an agreement. Then that agreement would be submitted to the executive board of the IMF before they plan to submit that after we get financial assurances. This is why from this point to that point, still it's understanding. So when you sign agreement, it has to be firm. This is why I think that has not been shared yet, in my view. To reveal detailed information of that kind of even understanding, you have to have a consent of the both parties of the disclosure. That's also important thing, even all the IBM program. And obviously, when you look at, I don't see anything kind of in terms of policy directions. We only talk about a lot of all this, where we are going to go. We're going to be a fiscal conciliation, tightening monetary policy to bring down the inflation, and restructure external and price. All these key elements have already been discussed openly.
Governor, you were quoted in the local papers, local media, that you were expecting the IMF loan to be approved by, the first tranche to be approved by end of this year, whereas one of the top IMF officials has said they can't predict the timing. Any update on that?
What I said and what I said, both are same. The way that media has reported is only the difference. I said what we expect is to get financial assurance in a couple of months, by somewhere in November. If we get the financial assurance, then we would be able to go to the executive board and get the program approved somewhere in December.
The workers' remittances to Sri Lanka was recorded at $325 million in August, the highest figure recorded so far this year. Further, this is also a $46 million increase in comparison to $279 million in July. Earnings from exports recorded $1.2 billion, which is a 11.2% year-on-year growth. According to the central bank's external sector report for the month of August, earnings from exports grew 11.2% to $1.2 billion compared to the same month last year due to an increase in earnings from industrial and agricultural exports. A decline was, however, recorded in mineral exports. Cumulative export earnings during January and August this year increased by 12.6% to $8,902 billion over the same period of last year. Import expenditure in August meanwhile declined 11.9% to $1,486 billion compared to $1,687 billion in August 2021. A decline in import expenditure is observed in investment goods and non-food consumer goods, while an increase was recorded in imports of intermediate goods and food and beverages. Import expenditure on a cumulative basis from January to August this year was $12.802 billion, which is a 4.6 year-on-year decline. As a result, the deficit in the trade account meanwhile narrowed to $261 million during August. Meanwhile, the cumulative deficit in the trade account during January-August 2022 also narrowed to $3.89 billion from $5.507 billion in the same period of 2021. In the meantime, workers' remittances to Sri Lanka increased to $325 million in August, in comparison to $279 million in the previous month, recording the highest monthly remittances so far this year. Tourist arrivals moderated in August to 37,760 from 47,293 arrivals in July 2022, while the United Kingdom, India, Germany and France remained the main source of countries for tourist arrivals in August. Tourism earnings during August are estimated at $68 million in comparison to $85 million in the previous month. Now, meanwhile, at the Colombo Bourse today, the all-share price index closed in negative territory as a result of price losses in counters such as Valuable One, Expo Lanka Holdings and Haley's. The SPI recorded 1.4% lower at 9,182.23, while the S&P SL20 index ended at 2,820.43, following a loss of 2.33%. The market turnover stood at 2.8 billion rupees. The consumer durables and apparel sector was the top contributor to the market turnover, while the energy sector was the second highest. Foreigners remained as net buyers, amounting to 63 million rupees. And that's all the news we have for you this evening. Join us again tomorrow at the same time. Good night.